In this episode of Project Car Haven, I remove redundant bracketry, I use cheap tools that I hope last more than one time, and I make some comparisons between some carburetors. Well, we're back on the Celica, and I know I mentioned in the last episode that I was going to paint and clean this tank. I have treated the inside, the rust is taken care of. I bought a can of tank sealer, but I'm not going to go ahead and refit this. This tank is from a UC Tirana or a Sunbird. This part of the tank actually sits over where the muffler and exhaust need to sit. I need that space. This isn't the right tank. Finding an original tank is impossible. I'm going to have to buy a aftermarket fuel cell and adapt that to fit. It should fit in the space I have. Give me the room back for a muffler, so this project can disappear. So obviously one of the hanging brackets is off. The other one I left in place to try and make it easier to refit this tank. I won't be needing that now, so I'm going to climb under there, take that out, find out any other little bolts that may have been involved in securing this tank in, and get them removed too. Favoured fixing method of all true car builders, a tech screw, or 2 or 10. That sounded delightful. Not much there holding up a full fuel tank, I tell you. Well, I think that's all the aftermarket bracketry for the fuel tank now removed. I did already go ahead and refit the bolt for the bent panhard rod. That can stay in place for now, but I will be purchasing an adjustable one so I can get rid of that because I'm not very happy with it. Well, in order to get this car to move, there is plenty to still sort out under the bonnet, but I'm moving from the back forwards, and the next item on the agenda is this, because it hits the console. The bend in this shifter is not correct. Typical factory Celica gear sticks come straight up, have a bend here, and run straight. This chrome piece extends further down to about here. I'm going to take this one out with a vise, levers, hammer, heat, and some swearing, attempt to straighten this out and change the angle of this so it looks more like the factory shifter, and we won't have the issue of hitting the console when trying to grab second or fourth or reverse. In order to remove the gear stick, there's just 4 bolts with Phillips head slots in top, so we can just remove this with a screwdriver, being careful not to let everything fly away because there is a spring under here. Well, as promised, I did use some leverage and some hammering and some swearing, and I managed to straighten the gear stick out somewhat to the point where it won't hit the console and it sits in a more natural position for the driver to operate. Because I cleaned it all up, I'll need to grease the cup and the lid, and also put a little bit of grease on the tip because it's always good to lubricate the tip before inserting. For that task, I'm going to use some of this Penrite moly grease I've had lying around for a while. It's a lithium grease with molybdenum disulfide, or something. So all around in here, preferably a thin coat, but I'm pretty inaccurate with what I'm doing. Bit on here. Don't forget the tip. Well, now it's just a matter of placing the shifter back into the gearbox and bolting it down, then testing out to make sure I've put it in the right spot so it actually shifts gears and isn't just floating in space. Slight little cutout here. Just need to make sure that lines up with where reverse is, because the reverse gear travels a little bit further than the other gears. Line it up, slide it in. Two lined up, the other two should be lined up nice and square. Okay, clearance. First, second, third, fourth, fifth, and reverse. Excellent. Up to the engine bay. So this car doesn't have a battery, so that's the first thing I need to sort out. I need to rig up a temporary fuel system because I still don't have a tank and I haven't plumbed it up correctly. I need to test that to make sure the pump actually circulates the fuel through the carburetor, so I at least have enough time to make the car move out of this spot and around the corner before stalling. I'm not going to secure the battery just yet because I'll need to take it out to clean all the filth out anyway, so it can just float loose. I'm not actually going to be driving anywhere anyway, so it's not too important. Beautiful. Well, next thing is I need to play around with the fuel lines and such. This air filter can go for now. So I just need to rig up a system that will run fuel from a remote tank that I'll strap into the engine bay. Just going to run with this Petrol Max maximum taste no sugar tank. I'm going to run the feed line in here, return line into here, strap it in here somewhere. Slightly related but unrelated, I'm also going to flare the end of this fuel pipe from the fuel tank. It has no flare on it at all. I have bought a flare tool. This tool here will give either a single or double flare, which is not really what we want because it'll make sharp edges for the hose to catch on. We want more of a bubble flare, which I intend to do with the other side, which is flat, and hopefully just force the tube apart, create a larger diameter section so the hose clamp will hold the hose in place rather than have it fly off. Alright, so I've got the tool placed and the support for the center there, and put a ratchet spanner on. Nope, it's just going sideways. I mean, yeah, there's a slight bubble flare there, that's good enough. Alright, so now I'm going to rig up some hoses for my temporary fuel tank. Just need to figure out where I'm heading here. Fuel pump outlet down here. Can always cut a new piece of hose if this ends up being too short. Okay, so I've mounted the temporary fuel tank. The plan is put the lines in, put some fuel into the carb to keep it running long enough so the pump can cycle and run, observe the fuel coming through the return back into the temporary fuel tank. Once that's working, we know the bowl is going to be filled by the fuel pump. The car will keep running. Put a timing light on, adjust the timing if required, close the bonnet and see if this thing will drive out under its own power. Fuel feed into the pump goes into there, hopefully to the bottom of that bottle, close to it. Return, where are you? Return. Back into the top. Put enough fuel in the bowl from the vent tubes to allow it to run long enough for the pump to run. Well, that might cause a fire. Perfect. All right, let's see if we can get it running and then check to see if the fuel pump's working. Okay, pump was blocked. Used some suction, i.e. my mouth. Now that's on fire. It appears to be free. Let's see if it will pump fuel now. Ah, come on. Okay, so the pump appears to be working and I'm getting flow back into the bottle, but it seems to be bypassing the carb and coming straight back out, and the bowl's running empty. I've tried tapping the housing to see if the float's stuck or the needle is stuck, and try and loosen that up and let fuel go into the bowl, and it's not working. So I think I'm at the point where I'm going to have to pull that carb off. I really did want it to run with the original carb and drive it out of here, but I think it's needs some work, and to do that I need to take it off anyway. So next step, change the carb. So this is a Cheba, or a Chinese Weber. It's a copy of a DGV 3236 found on lots of 2-litre cars. This one's jetted to suit a 1600. The advantage of this guy is it runs a mechanical secondary. So as you put your foot down more, it opens the secondary. You can control the airflow with your foot rather than the ASIN using a vacuum secondary. This diaphragm tends to fail. If it gets a hole in it, you lose that. Also, this one being completely seized doesn't help either. So the footprint of the original carb is actually smaller than the Weber, which means we need to run an adapter plate like this. Redline's been making these adapter plates, at least in Australia, for decades. Surprisingly, they are still available, so this will allow me to fit the Weber onto the standard manifold and fix the fueling issue. Also, this Weber is going to need some work. I'm going to need to fit inlet choker set up to be electric, have a manual choke conversion thingy to go on here. So I'll need to sort that out and then come back. So it appears the Cheba didn't come with all the parts that I need. There are no barbs for this. I can't swap over anything from the ASIN carb because these are banjo fittings. They just won't work in this scenario. I had to modify this. The hole was too small, so I needed to use a die grinder to open that up to get it to fit on the shaft for this. But it is bolted in and it does work. In preparation for that, I can remove the old gasket and put in a new one. So that is a standard gasket for the Weber. This is the adapter gasket. You can see the holes line up with the stud pattern for the Ace in Carb, but the gasket itself is longer to support the adapter plate. The adapter plate will use studs straight through here and has recesses here, which will then use bolts like this. They will then sit flush, hopefully, against that plate, giving a flat surface for the Weber to mount to that. Adaptation done. So none of these original studs need to be retained. There's all new studs that come with the adapter plate. So I'm going to take two of the original nuts, put them on a stud, tighten them up against each other, and then by winding out the bottom one, it will pull against the top, not be able to undo, and should draw the stud out. Support the lower one, tighten the upper one on top. Once they're tight, undo the lower one. Stud removed. Undo the nuts from each other. Move on to the next stud. Well, seeing as I have access, I'm going to clean that inlet manifold because it's disgusting, and it's going to be easier to clean it now than later with everything bolted back on. Now, I know I went to all the effort of just cleaning that, but then I realised there was a lip here, and maybe that is another spacer, and sure enough, that doesn't need to be there. There's another gasket to remove and some more cleaning to do now, and that guy can disappear. I'll use this gasket as the lower one, and I'll just trim out the center to suit the gap in the manifold, and that should work. I want to do these tight enough to create a seal, but not so tight that I crack the spacer or the manifold. But that feels about right. Oh, about there. I don't want to go any further. That is solid. That is good. Trim that out now. Just a test fit. I'm not going to fix it yet because I think it might be easier to work on the inlet barbs and stuff with the carb off. But it should look something like that. Well, that's going to mark the end of this episode. I'm going to need to order an inlet barb to fit that carb, so stuck for now. I'll see you in the next one.